Howdy and welcome to episode 70 of T-Shirts and Shawls. I'm Karen and today is Thursday, February 14th, 2019. So happy Valentine's Day. A little, historical nugget in case you're interested. So Valentine's Day, Saint Valentine is a Christian martyr who was, I believe he was beheaded, and I'm pretty sure it was around the 3rd century. But anyway, he had nothing to do himself with love. The idea of connecting Valentine's Day, so the feast day for Saint Valentine, with love is actually credited to medieval author Geoffrey Chaucer, whose Parliament of Fowls, which was my inspiration for my Parliament of Cowls book. So in his Parliament of Fowls, he has all of the birds coming together to pick their mates for the next year, and he says that it happens on St. Valentine's Day. So that connection of Valentine's Day and love is basically Chaucer's idea. So that's something that I just find really fascinating, and I wanted to share that with you in case you didn't know that. So Wally says hi. If you are, if you keep up with dates on the podcast, you might notice that it's been 3 weeks instead of 2 since my previous episode. I posted about this in the Ravelry group for the podcast, but basically last week Luke was sick with the flu. He had both A and B. And then as soon as he got better, my husband and I promptly turned around and got sick ourselves. So we basically just had a week where nothing much got done, and I couldn't record the podcast. So thank you guys for your well wishes, those of you who posted in the Ravelry group. Feeling so much better now. I've gotten caught up on things this week. But yeah, having that week off that I wasn't planning on was really not so much fun, but it's good. We're all healthy again, and we're getting caught up. So with that in mind, we'll go ahead and start this episode. So this time I am wearing a shirt from Belle of Beauty and the Beast, who is hugging a book. And Belle has always been my favorite Disney princess, mostly because of her love of books. And that is not just something that is in the Disney version. It does seem to be something that's pretty common in a lot of versions. One of my favorites is Robin McKinley, who actually wrote 2 different versions of Beauty and the Beast. But her one called Beauty, in it, when the Beast takes Belle to his library, actually I don't think she's called Belle, I think she's just called Beauty. Anyway, when the Beast takes her to his library, she looks around at all the books and she's like, I've never heard of any of these books. You know, what are they? Where did you get them? And he tells her, these are the books that have yet to be written. And I just think, ooh, that's just such a cool idea. But I also always wondered, you know, while a book is being written, does it start to gradually like erase itself from the Beast's library? Anyway, that the book never addresses that, but I've always wondered that. But anyway, I love that idea. So because of Belle's love of books, she's always been my favorite. And I picked this shirt today because I actually don't necessarily want to talk about reading. I want to talk about books. And I've been thinking about this a lot recently because Luke and I have gotten into a routine now where in the evening when it's time for bed, when usually he would get into bed and I would read to him. Then as he was starting to read, you know, he would read a little, you know, some parts of the books, and then eventually he was reading to me, and sometimes we would like alternate reading. But now we're at the point where Luke is reading a lot on his own, so we're not really doing the reading out loud as much anymore. But he still really wants me to be part of his reading time in the evening before bed. So what we do basically is I sit there, or I, lay in his bed with him. So we're laying side by side in his bed, and he has a book and I have a book, and we're both reading. And I've really been enjoying that that experience and sharing reading with him. And one of the things I've been making sure to do is that the book that I'm reading while we have our nightly routine, I'm reading a physical copy of a book rather than my usual ebook. because, just be honest, we have issues with screen time, and I want to encourage Luke to not always have a screen in his face. And so I don't actually, even though he has a Kindle, I encourage him to read his physical copies of books rather than on a screen. And so at night, I don't think it's fair for me to tell him, you have to read a physical book and you can't look at a screen if I'm sitting there with a screen. So I've been reading a physical copy of a book. And I've mentioned this a few times. My current read is the Dark is Rising series by Susan Cooper. This is the very last book in the series, Silver on the Tree, and I'm about 2/3 of the way through with that, so I'm almost done with that. Anyway, so basically reading the physical copies of books, that's something that I have not done very much in the past few years. And that's something that I'm realizing with this experience with Luke that I've really missed. So I've always been a reader. Books have always been important to me. I'm surrounded by books. I couldn't imagine not having, shelves and shelves and shelves of books. That just feels wrong. Anytime we've had to move, having just tons and tons of boxes of books, and when I say tons and tons, I'm kind of talking about weight too, because books are heavy. I learned that you do not pick a giant box and put a bunch of books in it and then expect to be able to move that box. It's better to have a bunch of smaller boxes with books in them, so that way the weight is more manageable. Anyway, so lots and lots and lots of books surrounding me. And when e-readers first started coming out, I remember my mom got really excited about it and she wanted to buy me a Kindle for my birthday. But I told her, no, I appreciate that, but thank you. I don't want a Kindle because it really, I just, nothing beats the feeling of a book. Physically turning the pages, holding it in your hands and getting to, have those words right there. And so I turned down the Kindle, and I kind of took a stance of, I'm never going to be interested in reading ebooks. I'm always going to have the physical copy of a book. One thing I've learned about myself is never say never, because that usually comes back to haunt me. But gradually I started reading more on ebooks. And a lot of that actually has to do with knitting, because I wanted to read and knit at the same time. And for a long time, I actually had like a book holder thing that you could prop your book in, and so it would hold it open, and then it would also prop it up, so that way I wasn't having to look flat down at a table. So I would read and knit that way. But then I would have to like physically turn the pages, and I would have to pull the page out from the holder and kind of put it. It was basically this whole process that was very physical. And in mass market paperbacks like this, the particular holder I had didn't really work quite as well. It didn't hold it open well unless you broke the spine, and I don't like breaking spines of books intentionally. If it happens, then it happens, but I don't like, taking a book and forcing it open, which is almost what you had to do with this book holder I had, so it would stay open. So I gradually started reading books on a Kindle. Actually, I think I had a Nook first, and then a Kindle and my iPad, because I could prop that up and just kind of hold my pinky out, while I'm knitting, hold my pinky out and tap the screen and turn the page that way. And so then it got to the point where I became reading almost all on ebooks and not on physical books. And ebooks, I'm watching Wally so he doesn't jump up above me again. With reading ebooks, there are a lot of benefits. It's a lot easier to take a Kindle, or even just reading on your phone, than to always carry around a book with you, especially if you're near the end of a book and you want to, make sure that you've got maybe 2 or 3 books so you don't run out of reading material. So I just got a phone call and had to, it just kind of interrupted the recording, so I'll have to splice this together. Anyway, carrying around the phone or an iPad to read versus a physical book. I actually read several of the Outlander books, so those are really big books, on my phone. Not even on my iPad with a bigger screen. On my tiny phone screen, I read several Outlander books. Because it was easier to carry that around than to carry a really thick book. But now I've kind of gone to completely the other way, where I don't read physical books and I only read ebooks. And there are lots of books on my shelf that I have wanted to read and just haven't, because I have them in physical form and not ebook form. And I think, well, I don't need to buy the ebook because I have the book. I own it. But it doesn't really do you much good if all it does is sit on your shelf and you don't actually read it. So basically what reading with Luke each evening has made me realize is how much I miss holding a physical book and sitting down in a chair and curling up and just reading this book and focusing just on this book, not reading and knitting or reading and doing something else, but just sitting down and reading. I don't do that much anymore, and I really miss that. I used to read somewhere between 150 and 250 books each year, and now if I finish a book or two a month, that is that's kind of what my reading rate. And here I'm talking about fiction books. There I am reading nonfiction here and there, and sometimes I do read nonfiction in physical form because I like to highlight things. But so fiction here. Besides this series, I can't remember the last fiction book that I read in hard copy. So basically, I really miss curling up with a physical copy of a book and just focusing on that book. Some of that is hard because of having a child. I can't really do that as often when he's home because really getting engrossed in a book and not paying any attention to my child is not such a great thing. But I need to maybe make more time for reading. And this may mean that there's a little less time for knitting. And as much as I don't like that, I want to curl up with a book and just focus on the book for a while. So I think that kind of moving forward, maybe some of my morning times where I usually drink coffee and knit in the morning before everyone wakes up, maybe a couple of times a week I'll do coffee and reading instead of coffee and knitting. It doesn't have to be, all one or all the other. I could do an every other day thing, or, however I want to do it. Or just, kind of what I feel like that morning. And maybe some evenings, instead of watching TV, especially if there's really not much that I'm interested in watching, maybe that'll be an evening for reading instead. So basically just carving out some more time to sit down, and I do want to sit down with the physical copy and not the ebook. So it might mean that I'm going to the library more again. But I want to do that more. And so I'm sharing this with you guys because a lot of times if I tell you guys, then it helps me kind of with accountability a bit. And also just remembering that this is something important that I want to do. So that's one of the reasons I want to share it with you guys. I think my next kind of big project for reading will be the Discworld books by Terry Pratchett. I have almost all of the Discworld books. A couple of the very last that were published I don't have, so I will, when I get to them, I will have to get those. But I have them all. They're sitting on my shelf, and I've only read like 5 or 6 of them because it was kind of at that point where I was transitioning to ebooks. And again, I thought, well, I've got this book on my shelf. I don't need to buy the ebook because I already have the book. So I think that's going to be kind of my next reading project, although I'll probably take a break from Discworld every now and then and read something else. Though I just have to figure out which order to read them in. If you've ever read Discworld or you've looked up, there's this really great graphic that is the Discworld reading order, and it's kind of like a flowchart type of thing, but they've got arrows pointing here and there and everywhere. This book is connected to this one and whatnot. So I just kind of need to sit down with that and plan out kind of a reading order, at least to get started. So I know which ones are the first few ones to read. I will probably go ahead and reread the ones I've already read just so I can make sure that I'm getting kind of immersed in that world again. So that's the plan, that's the goal, to kind of be like Belle on my shirt and to hug books again, and not just the electronic versions, because honestly, reading on my iPad, I've mentioned this before, it's so easy to get distracted, to say, hey, I should check Ravelry and see what's going on, or check my email. So I think the other thing is I'm going to make reading time be a non-distraction time where I go take my phone and my iPad and I put it in another room, because I think that I just, if it's right beside me, gotta be honest, I don't really have that willpower to not reach for it whenever I think about it. But if I have to, if I'm all comfy in a chair and I have to get up to go get it, it's less likely to happen. So all of this is to say that there might be a little less knitting time coming up, but that's going to be replaced by reading time. So perhaps the what I'm reading section will be a little bit longer, which I actually don't have planned for this particular episode, because I think I'll wait until I finish this book, so probably next episode, and talk a little bit more about the entire series, and then also what else I'm reading. So no what I'm reading section in this episode, but in future, hopefully there will be more, and more for me to talk about. So that's why I'm wearing this shirt today. So I thought I'd bring Luna on camera real fast, just so you guys could see her and say hi. She is just about a month away from her first birthday. March 17th is her birthday. So she's definitely growing. She's probably at her, pretty much her full size at this point, maybe a little more growth, but pretty much full sized. And she's definitely quite a character. And we really are enjoying having her. And I don't know if she wants to stay up here or get down. We'll kind of see what happens. You want to stay up here? I'm going to get down. Down? Okay, she's going to get down. There we go. Ooh, I see Eva, but if I move toward her, she'll probably run. Eva's gotten very skittish lately. Not lately. She's kind of gradually been doing that. Usually when people come over, she hides completely, and I think that other people probably don't believe that she actually exists. So we talk about this cat named Eva, but they've never seen her. So anyway, so I probably won't be able to pull her over. Eva, come here. Eva, come here. Yeah, she's just looking at me like, no, I don't think so. But she spends a lot of time in my lap whenever I'm sitting down. So I'm still giving her attention. So it's not like she's being completely ignored, but she doesn't seem to really like, when people move toward her quickly, or basically any strangers. Okay, so a little update on the animals there. In the what I've finished section, what I have finished is a pair of socks. So these are, just a plain stockinette socks, cuff down, with a heel flap and gusset, my usual go-to sock for self-striping socks. The yarn is from Mustache. This is the Everything is Awesome colorway, which was actually my very first colorway that I got from Mustache. And I looked at my Ravelry page to see when that was, and that was in 2015, March 2015, so almost 4 years ago. So even though I've knit several other Mustache socks, I had not knit this very first one that I'd bought. So I'm glad that I did that. And so a little bit, I mean, it's not a problem, but I did have a little bit of a mess up, I guess, in the heel. So the nice thing about Mustache is she creates her skeins so there are two matching half skeins. Sorry, I had something on my lip. Two matching half skeins, and so that way your socks are going to pretty much match up really, really well. And I either like my socks to match really well or to not match at all. It's when it's just like slightly off that it starts to bother me. And I'm saying that in these there is an offness, but it's off enough that it doesn't bother me. Anyway, so things look good, everything is matching up, and then take a look at the heels. What happened on the heels? So I've mentioned in the past that sometimes what I do on self-striping is when I get to the heel, I use the other end of the yarn ball to make the heel, so that way I can come back and not interrupt the self-striping pattern. So you can see, if you just look at the top of the sock here, that I have not interrupted that striping pattern for the heel. And there's actually a question about doing that in the questions for Karen thread on Ravelry, so I will be answering that in a little later in this episode. So talking about this again. But basically I take the other end of the yarn ball and do the heel. Well, with Mustache, because she does those two 50-gram matching skeins, you end up with 2 yarn balls. And so the first sock, apparently I got a bright idea that instead of using, so this is the yarn from the first sock, instead of using the other end, I pull from the center, so it would be the outer end. Instead of using the other end from this specific cake that I was working from, I was going to take the other cake that was for the second sock. I just finished the second sock, so I haven't straightened up this. I rewind them, like this one is rewound. So that's why this one's all messy. So I took the outside end of the second cake of yarn and I used that to make the heel on the first sock. But of course I didn't write that down. And there was enough time that passed between doing the heel of the first sock and doing the heel of the second sock that I didn't remember that I did that. So when I got to the heel of sock number 2, I used the end of the ball of yarn that I was already using for sock number 2. Well, I had already done a heel from this same ball of yarn, so of course it wasn't going to start in the same place, the same color sequence as the first one. That's over here on this skein, or this ball of yarn. So my heel color is completely different on this sock versus this sock. And I didn't notice it until I was, probably because it started with, even though it's the lighter pink, it still started with pink. So I didn't really notice it until I got to the orange and realized, oh, I was expecting black. Why am I knitting with orange? And that's when it kind of suddenly hit me what I had done. And I didn't, even though I wasn't that far into the heel flap, I didn't want to rip it out and start it where I thought it would be fine. And it is fine. I'm perfectly okay with the heels being different. That does not bother me. And I think it's actually kind of fun to have the heels be a little bit different. But basically it's a question of, when you do stuff that's a little bit outside your normal, write it down. Of course, because this is my kind of go-to, I don't have to think about it type of project. Even if I'd written a note, like on my Ravelry page or something, I probably wouldn't have looked back at it. So even if I had written a note, it might not have helped me. But it is a good idea to keep notes anyway. The other thing is that I was pretty sure on the first sock that I finished up the first sock when I was at the retreat for my knitting guild. So I wasn't really paying attention when I was finishing it. And I go to where I'm at, let's see, 8 stitches per needle. So 8 times 4, 32. So basically when I'm at 32 stitches, when I'm decreasing for the toes, then I start decreasing every round. Before that, I'm decreasing every other round. And I completely forgot to start decreasing every round until I got almost to the end. It's fine. I mean, it just makes the toe a little bit longer. It's not really that big of a deal. And of course, I did not write that down. Again, did not keep notes for myself. So when I got to the toe of the second sock, you know, I had just this little thought in the back of my head about, isn't this the sock where I did the, I didn't start decreasing every round? And I couldn't remember for sure, so I'm staring at the first sock, you know, trying to figure out, okay, is that a decrease and then that's not a decrease? And so I decided, I'm pretty sure that's what happened, and so I did that on the second sock, and they do seem to match up pretty well. If you put the points of the red, it looks like they're the same length. So I think I actually managed to do that okay. But yeah, take notes and then make sure if you've taken notes that you go back and read your notes if they are there. So anyway, so that is my finished project. It's the only thing that I've finished in the past 3 weeks, but I have been working on other stuff, so I will talk about that next. So I just realized that there is actually another project that I finished in the past 3 weeks. I think I finished it not too long after I recorded. the other episode, and it was put aside and I didn't see it when I was preparing for recording. Anyway, so this is the Young, Scrappy, and Cozy Mystery Knit Along that I participated in. So this is the finished cowl, and I think I remember talking about how I wasn't really sure while I was working on it exactly how it was going to be worn. And this, the designer actually did a whole video like with ways of actually wearing it, but it seems like her favorite way is to wear kind of the point, one of the points down, and then to kind of, she talks a lot about like floofing the neck part. But anyway, so this is the cowl. It is Hamilton based, so it has lyric, basically words from Hamilton. So here, got look around. It says work at one point, and then the other side says rise up. So there's the words rise up. So yeah, this was a really fascinating construction because you start out working actually you're technically always working flat. So you're working flat. There is a point where you do all these increases, and then eventually you join the two sides, but instead of working in the round, you just change basically which direction your flat knitting is going. So it was really, really fascinating just to see how the construction was put together. So there's that side, and I'm really happy with how it turned out, and I loved this idea. If you're not into Hamilton, you can still do this if you like the look of the cowl, because she gives you options for either not including any words if you don't want to include words, or she just did an update to the pattern where she does a whole alphabet. So that way, if you want to substitute any other words that make more sense to you or that you prefer, you can do that. So even if you're not a Hamilton fan, I do recommend this pattern because it was a lot of fun just to see the way the construction worked. And then to do the mosaic knitting. So it's color work knitting, but you're still only working with one color on each row because you're slipping stitches to create the color work. So I'm glad that I remember that and could record this and add this to this episode. So yay, another finished object. So since I finished a pair of socks, I always like to have socks on the needle, so I'd already wound this yarn, and so I cast on last night, and cast on to the point where I've barely done anything. I think that's like one and a half even rounds of ribbing, so just barely getting started. This is, get my needles back in here, this is another colorway from Mustache Yarn, and this is one of her Star Wars yarns, Jin Erso. So I wanted to pick something a little bit different from what I had just done, because I have a lot of other mustache skeins that have got bright colors and multicolors. So I picked this one since it is going to give me a different sock experience, since I've been knitting the Everything is Awesome socks for quite a while. It took me a while to get through those. And then this time around, instead of using the Flexi Flips or the Haya Flyers, which I have been using, I'm back to my DPNs from Dyak Craft, D-Y-A-K Craft, because these are my favorite needles, and as much as I've been enjoying using those Haya Flyers, I really do like knitting socks on DPNs, and so I thought it's time I actually had to go find them and dig them out. It's been a while since I've used them, so I'm excited to be using them again. And I put that in the wrong one. Okay, so sock project. Nothing much right now since I only just cast on last night, but it is started at least. Then another project that has been a long-term project is the 3 sheets shawl. So I'm knitting this out of my Cornwall base, which is 100% BFL, blue face Leicester. And it is, let me get the right side out for you guys because it's got some cables on it. It is growing and growing and growing. You can see lots of stitches on the needles now. And so there you go. And I am at the point where I am almost done with the second skein of yarn. This is a 3 skein project, and I need to go wind up that 3rd skein. Twice now I have picked up this project to work on, and looked at it and realized, oh, that's right, I need to wind that third skein so I can continue on with this project. And then I keep forgetting to wind the yarn. So today it is on my list of things to do that I'm going to wind up that third skein and put it in here so that I can continue on with this project. Because I do want this to be a sample for DFW Fiber Fest. I still have a little time, so I should be able to finish it. But I do want it to be a sample, so I need to get it finished. And having the excuse for why I'm not working on it be the yarn is not ready. That's something I can do something about pretty quickly. And just want to show off my bag again that the wonderful Diana of Diana Couture made for me. So, love this bag. Anyway, so that's one project that I've been working on, but it's also been on pause while I stupidly have not wound the yarn. The other project, which also is going to be a booth sample, I showed this to you guys a while back. This is Birds of a Feather, and it is alternating my Camelot base, merino cashmere nylon, right side is this side, with a mohair silk lace weight. So the darker color is the MCN and the lighter color is the mohair, which you can see is more airy, and I don't know if you can see the fluff on the screen, but hopefully you can. So this is Birds of a Feather. I have made more progress on this. There's the first lace section, and I am almost finished with this lace section here. After this point, I get to the section where instead of increasing every, I think it's every other row, it's going to maintain the same number of stitches. So basically kind of the middle section of the shawl, and then eventually I'll get to a decrease section. So I don't think I'm quite halfway, but definitely at the point where it feels like once you get past all of the increases and you know that no more stitches are going to get added, that's a good feeling on a project, I think. So I'm really loving how this is turning out. The experience with the mohair has been interesting. The fuzziness has been a pretty big factor in knitting because it can be a challenge to see where stitches are on your needle. There have been a couple of times that I've actually increased a stitch, not because there was an actual stitch on the needle, but because there was such a large piece of fluff that was kind of wrapped over the needle that I thought it was a stitch, and I knit into it, and I guess it held. I think I've done that twice. So the fluff itself has kind of created a new stitch. So that's been a fun experience. And there have been a few times where I had to fudge the numbers just a little bit, add an extra increase or decrease, because when I counted my stitches, I wasn't at the number that I needed. Just because the yarn really is hard to read. It's hard to see with the fluffiness where exactly your stitches are. But in this type of project, you know, since it's just a garter stitch section, if you're a stitch off here or there, as long as you get the right number of stitches, by the time I get up to the lace section, it really hasn't been that much of a problem. So basically, I think it is a fun experience. It is probably not something that I will work with a lot. I still definitely want to try a project where I hold the mohair silk blend with another yarn. So I'm knitting both of them together because I think that's a really cool look too. So I will do another project that does that. But probably after that, I may work with mohair again, may not. We'll kind of see. But it is a yarn that I am going to have a little bit of at DFW Fiber Fest that I've dyed. So, excuse me, that is one reason I wanted to knit this sample, so that people could see what that yarn looks like knit up. Excuse me, I'm going to grab some water. Okay, so that is that project. And then the last project I want to talk about, because Boxy apparently just hasn't gotten any work done. So it's still in my projects bag, but I just haven't really worked on it. But this one I'm pretty sure I have not shown you guys, or if I did, it was in the very early stages. Realized I don't have a brioche project on the needles. I need to fix that. So this is another Leslie Ann Robinson pattern. I am finding some really great brioche patterns by other designers besides Leslie Ann Robinson, so I do plan on doing other designers' brioche patterns. Got several in my queue, but for right now, I'm doing another one of hers. And this is Donita. So it is a shawl, and this is the progress. Oops. This is the progress that I've made on it so far. This is a DK weight yarn, and it's one of the yarns that I bought when I went to McKinney Knittery a while back. I showed you guys the yarn. It is, I actually need to look because it's back here. Oh, Magpie, that's it. So it's this Magpie that is completely washing out the label, Magpie yarn. So it's 2 skeins of each color. So I probably should go ahead and wind up the second skeins now so I have them ready whenever I need them. Should learn from the other project. Anyway, so that is what this one is. I'm really liking the way it looks. I prefer this side. I think the lighter color side to me, just because I think you can see things more clearly, but I do also like this dark side back here as well. So really enjoying this project, getting lots of brioche practice on that. And that is what I've been working on. Had a little bit of time when Luke and then when I was sick, where there were a couple of days in there that I really didn't get much knitting done at all, but I feel like I've made some decent progress in the past 3 weeks. Hopefully have more to share with you guys in 2 weeks when I record again. But for now, let's go on to what I've been stashing. So at the East Texas Fiber Festival, which was in November, I had made one purchase. I purchased yarn from the dyer who was next to me, Dye Lab Yarns. And when I was packing up for the end of the show, I remember putting the yarn just in amongst all my other booth stuff. And I got home and I unpacked everything, but I couldn't find the yarn. And I was really upset because I really liked the yarn and I was really excited about it, and I couldn't find it. And I searched through all of my booth stuff. I even looked in the box where I keep the hooks. I thought there is no way I would put yarn in a box with the hooks because I would be afraid of it getting snagged. But I'm like, I'm gonna check everywhere to make sure that I cover all of my bases, and I could not find the yarn. So I thought maybe I accidentally fell out of something, or maybe I did unpack it and I put it in a safe place and I don't remember. I don't know what happened to it. So I was really, really sad, and it's been several months. And then fairly recently, I think it was right after the last podcast recording, somebody had ordered copies of my books, my 2 knitting project books. And I opened up the box that I bring to festivals with me with my books, and I opened up that box, and lo and behold, there was the yarn. Apparently it was the one box I did not open and did not check once I got back, and nobody has bought a book between now and when I did check a couple of weeks back. So I had not opened that box, and there it was. So now I get to share this yarn that I've had since November, but haven't been able to share. So Dye Lab Yarns, this is a BFL silk cashmere. That is one of the reasons I was super excited about it. So a blend of my favorite wool, Blue Face Leicester, and silk and cashmere in this stunning blue. So I know you think that purple is my favorite color because of my hair and I surround myself with a lot of purple, but honestly, blue. That is my favorite. Shirt, the Belle blue. Blue is my favorite color, so I love this yarn. It is fantastic and gorgeous. Here is the tag for Dye Lab Yarns. This color is Cumulus, which I think is definitely fitting. And now I get to figure out what I want to do with it, and it is so squishy and soft and wonderful, and I'm so excited that I found it. So thank you, Leslie, for ordering the books so I could open up that box and find this yarn. So I'm gonna take pictures and add it to my Ravelry stash, and then I want to use it right away, so I've got to figure out what I want to do with it. So that's super exciting. Maybe I'll do something with beads. I don't know. Maybe a shawl. I don't know. Anyway, the other thing that I've been stashing is, I've mentioned multiple times in the past that I love these stitch markers from Ann Tudor. She does glass stitch markers where she does lamp work, where she, you know, over a big torch, she melts glass, and I love her stitch markers. So I'm gonna kind of show you one at a time. They're still on the little card. So Ann Tudor. She does a lot of sheep, and I have quite a few of her sheep, but I saw this this blue one, and I decided I really needed this blue sheep, and since I was ordering other stuff anyway, I might as well throw that one in. Then she did this llama, so she's got, I think, 2 different colors of the llamas, so this is the one that I picked. Hopefully you can see that. And then she has done a series of dogs. That's right, she's got a Boston Terrier. So there's my little Boston Terrier stitch marker. Oh, that's just moving around. Stop moving. There you go. So there's the Boston Terrier. She's got a lot of other dog breeds. So if you're a dog person and you need some stitch markers, go see if she has your dog breed. I think it's just really fabulous, and it makes me really happy. And I need to, now that I've shown you guys, I can take it off the card and use them for a project. Maybe I will use it for whatever project I use with this yarn, if it needs a stitch marker. So love these stitch markers. Definitely go check out Ann Tudor. Her website is just anntudor.com, so it's really easy. And she's got lots of other really great stitch markers. What she's been doing is kind of having the stitch markers that are available all the time, like the sheep are almost always available. And then she has different kind of seasons where she has different stitch markers that are available. So if you like really love some of the season, and not necessarily like specific to a season, like not a holiday thing. She just basically has such a large range of the styles that she does, the different stitch markers, that it's hard for her to keep up just from a making base of having, you know, hundreds of different stitch markers that people can order. She basically cuts down and says, like, I don't know her exact number, but like these 40 are available for this particular time period, and then she rotates out another however many stitch markers. So if you look at her website and for some reason you don't like what's currently up there, check back in a couple of months when she kind of turns over the collection and puts a new setup up. But honestly, you should find something you love because she's got great stitch markers. Anyway, so so excited to find that yarn and then to have some fun stitch markers. For Roundtable Yarn news, gosh, I blinked and DFW Fiberfest feels like it is just around the corner. I've been telling myself that it's in March, even though it is the first weekend in April, because if I tell myself April, that makes me think that there's more time than I do have. So if I tell myself like end of March, then that feels like a more realistic time frame. So because I'm thinking March, you know, that's next month. February, since it's a short month, we're halfway over. So, oh my gosh, DFW Fiberfest is almost here. But I have a list of, you know, this is what I need to do to get ready for DFW. This is what I need to dye to get ready. And the list of the things that I need to do is actually getting a lot shorter. I am checking off the things that I need to get done. A lot of times those are things that I'm kind of scrambling a bit in the last week to finish. So it feels really good to have those, to have a list and know exactly what I need to do, and then also have a lot of those things checked off. As far as what I'm dyeing, just going through and doing, you know, dyeing every day, since I don't have a setup where I can dye large quantities at one time. I basically have to do dyeing almost every day, so that way I can build up the inventory. And I have been holding back the inventory and not posting it on the website, so that way I can make sure, I mean, I want to sell the yarn. It doesn't really matter when it sells, but it is better if I'm able to fill up my booth and not have to scramble to do a lot of dyeing at the last minute to replenish the stock. So I've been working on that, and that's probably something I'm going to try this year. Have stock that I'm dyeing specifically for the shows that I'm not posting on the website, just so I can make sure that I feel like I'm covering each of the shows. Because a few times, like for East Texas Fiber Festival, I felt like I really didn't have, especially some bases, I really didn't have a lot. And I would like to have more, and some of that was because I didn't have time to do it all, to cover both the website and all the shows. So that's kind of one of my things this year. I'm gonna try to manage dying for shows versus dying for the website. So with that in mind, probably the custom orders on the website will be the best way to get exactly what you want. And so instead of waiting for something to come up in stock, especially if you're not able to come to an event, just filling out the custom order and picking your yarn base and which of my colors you want, and then I will dye that for you. I definitely do not mind, jumping that forward in my dye schedule and getting that prepared for you. So don't feel bad about making a custom order. I'm always happy to do that, but that's probably going to be online the best way to get exactly what you want. The exception to that is self-striping. I don't do custom orders for self-striping, but I am gradually, slowly working on building up that self-striping inventory, including a few new colorways. Anyway, so that's what I've been working on. I also have the Winter Fiber Fun Retreat coming up. Gosh, next week. Is it next week? Oh my gosh, it is next week. Yeah. So I will be teaching 2 classes all about the yarn and beginning cables. That second one I took over for another teacher who is not going to be able to make it after all. So I've been spending the past week or so, typing up handouts for that, getting all of the supplies ready. I forgot to grab them. I think they're over in that box. I actually designed a really quick pair of fingerless mitts with cables, 2 different cables going up, or same cable, basically a 6-stitch cable, but one going in one direction and the other going in the other direction, so that way the students in the class have a project to work on. So I did a quick fingerless mitts pattern and knit those up, so I would have that available. And I've been winding off a lot of yarn samples for the All About the Yarn class. So I'm excited about that. And then after that, really will just be kind of laser focused on DFW. And then the other things that I'm working on, I know, Yarn Club, you're probably wondering, when's the next Yarn Club? I don't know. Not really sure. I am working on the Yarn Club, which will also be a mystery knit along and crochet along. Because I have a crochet designer that I'll be working with, but that kind of stalled for a while, and I couldn't figure out why it was stalling. And basically I've been stuck in the research mode, the read the story and write the summary mode. I hadn't even gotten to the colors or the design yet. I've been stuck in the reading the story mode. And I would sit down to start reading the story, and I was taking notes, and it just wasn't really going. In fact, I'll tell you what story I was reading. So it's the story of Percival, and so I was reading the French version, Chrétien de Troyes, and Chrétien's story is problematic because it doesn't have an ending. So there are several continuations that were written that continued the story. So I was doing research on all of the different continuations and the endings and trying to decide which continuation I might want to use for the story. And then I sat down and started reading the story, and then I thought, well, maybe this is too complicated with all the continuations. So there's the German version of the Percival story, which is called Parzival, and it is very different in some ways. So I thought, but there were, enough of the things that I wanted from the story that I thought, okay, so I'll switch over and do the German version. So I started reading that one, and then I just kind of got bogged down in that, so I bounced back over to the French version. And I've been taking notes, and I'm realizing that I'm just not as into the story as I thought I was. And maybe it's just this particular moment in time, the story's not grabbing me, because I remember, especially the German story, I really liked it when I read it the first time, but for some reason, as a yarn club, like I'm thinking of the story and thinking about how it might work with colors and how it might work with the design, it's just not grabbing me for that inspiration. So potentially at some point I will do a yarn club with Percival, but I'm thinking that for this idea of the yarn club with the design, it's just not the right story. So I just kind of came to that realization very recently, so I haven't sat down to figure out what the new story, what the right story might be. So that's kind of the next step in that. I'm going back to probably to Mallory and looking in L'Amour d'Arthur and seeing what other story I might want to use for that club. And then I had this, especially since I was reading, still got the book in front of me, so this is a story that has Arthurian ties. It is not a... This is apparently the episode of me continually getting interrupted by phone calls. Got another phone call. I record on my phone, so when a phone call comes, it stops recording. Anyway, so this book is not a retelling of the Arthurian story, but for people familiar with the Arthurian story, there are elements throughout. So it got me started thinking about modern day Arthurian stories, whether they be retellings or reimaginings or things like this that are kind of inspirations inside. And it made me think, oh, maybe it would be really fun to have like a read-along instead of me summarizing the story, to actually have you guys who are in the Yarn Club read the actual book as well. And so if you are on my mailing list, I put a survey. I kind of explained that briefly in the last newsletter that just came out this week. And there was a survey in there that asked, would you be interested in that type of yarn club, a read-along yarn club? And if so, here are a couple of books that I've already thought about that could be used. Do you have any suggestions for other books? And so far, the response to that is mostly on the people who've answered have mostly said yes. I did ask people, like, if you are not interested, please go ahead and go to the survey and click no, because knowing how many no's there are is just as important as the yeses. But there are still a majority of people are saying yes. So that's another idea that I have. So that's kind of something that's kind of in the back of my mind that I'm thinking about. The problem with so many Arthurian modern stories is that a lot of times they are trilogies or even longer series, 5+ books. And so I don't want to necessarily have it be a big, gigantic commitment by reading, you know, an entire series of books. So finding standalones or finding a single book in a series that could stand by itself is going to be the potential challenge there. And so I'm kind of trying to think about that. So I've gotten some great suggestions, but a lot of those have been the trilogies in the series. So that's kind of some of the reason why I didn't include those in the original list. Because I don't want to overwhelm people with reading, because some people did kind of comment on, I would feel bad if I got behind in the reading and I couldn't keep up. So I think trying to pick something that's not going to be such a strenuous commitment, which something like Avalon High, which is a young adult book, that's kind of a more fun type of read, that might be something that's a good, maybe just the first time around. You know, maybe there would be a future club that has a read along that is like, you know, a 5 series books. But thinking about something that's a little easier to for people to get into and to commit to. So those are kind of some yarn club thoughts that have been going through my head. And I'm realizing that, you know, if I don't actually start working on these, then none of them are going to come to pass. So I need to kind of start getting some of those details taken up. But also I've got this whole list, and I think I actually mentioned this in the newsletter. I actually have a list that I've made in a journal of all these big, I call them the big ideas, the things that I want to do that, you know, I get really excited about. But knowing that I can't do all of them immediately right away, that I do have to spread them out. So I put them on that list, so that way I can remember what ideas I've had. And when I do find that I have time to, you know, or it's time for the next big idea, I go to that list. I can choose from that, excuse me. So a lot of times I've like sent out polls and newsletters saying, what about your interest in this or that? And maybe you're wondering, well, why have I never seen you actually do anything about that? A lot of times it's just because I can't do everything at once. I have to admit to that. And as excited about some things as I am, I just need to, you know, pick one thing at a time and focus on it. But I think it's time to pick the next yarn club idea and get that going. So I'm gonna figure out what I want to do and try to move forward on that, because I would love to have something to announce at DFW Fiberfest about the next yarn club. That's kind of my one of my ideas, because I was able to announce at Houston Fiberfest the most recent yarn club that I did. So that was kind of nice to be able to have that that place to send out, or to give people information. So that's kind of, I'm not going to guarantee that anything's going to, you know, happen by then, but that is kind of a little deadline in my head of when I would like to have some plans in place. If not earlier, we'll see. If I get super inspired by something and really want to move forward on it, it might happen earlier. Checking my list. I think that's pretty much it for Brown Table Yarns. Yeah, so that's what I've been working on. So I have two questions in the questions for Karen thread to respond to. So the first one comes from Susan S. Martiche. When you're making self-striping socks, I think you mentioned that when you start the heel flap, you use yarn from the opposite end of the skein. Yes. Do you knit the heel turn with that same yarn? Do you continue with the same yarn when you're picking up the stitches for the gusset, or do you use the leg yarn for that? Basically, she said that when I did the Courtly Love socks, I just kept knitting through the whole sock and there was a break in the stripes. I bought some yarn from Mustache and want the stripes to be continuous through the foot. Yes, indeed. So what I do is, so I'm knitting mine cuff down. When I get to the point where I'm ready to start the heel, so this was the yellow yarn, was the last yarn that I did, the last color that I did in the leg. So as I'm seeing that the next color, so for me it was this red, as I'm seeing that the next color is about to come up in my yarn, I know that that's time to start the heel. I like to start them very close to a break in colors. If you've got wider stripes, you might do it in the middle of a stripe. You know, you can do it at any point, but I like to do mine at the end of a color. So then I grab the other end of the yarn and I do my heel flap. Then I do my gusset, or then I do what do you do? You do the heel flap and then you do the decreases. So that way you turn the heel. So I do that. So the yellow here was the last of the main body. Then the pink is where I picked up the other end of the skein. So pink to black, then the blue, it looks like that's about where the heel turn happens. And then this lighter pink was still part of that same end. I'm still continuing that that point where I am doing the other end of the skein. And then the time that it comes to pick up the gusset stitches. So what I really want to make sure to do is to not have a weird line of color. I should have grabbed another self-striping sock where I just knit straight through and ended up with like some weird like half line of a different color. So I want to make sure to not do that. So at that point, when I'm picking up the gusset stitches, that's when I typically go back to the yarn from the main body. So the yellow stripe is where I stopped using the yarn from the main body, knitted from the other end all the way around, heel flap and turn. And then the red here is going back to the yarn from the main body. So yellow to red was the sequence. And I used the red yarn to pick up the stitches along the gusset. Because at that point, when you're picking up those gusset stitches, that's when you're working back in the round. So basically, once you get back to the point where you're working in the round, that's where you want to go back to your main yarn. So I pick up the gusset stitches with the main yarn. So that way I'm not ending up with some weird line of a different color. Because those rows are rounds are going to have more stitches than your main body, because you're doing decreases for the gusset. And this is if you're doing the heel flap and gusset construction. If you're doing another construction, you might do something completely different. But the heel flap and gusset construction, because you're decreasing for the gusset, your rounds are going to have more stitches. So you'll notice that my red stripe here is a little more narrow than the red stripe here. So if you just count the number of rows, I think there are about 4 here and 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 over here. So you are going to have stripes that are slightly narrower, but you're going to keep that color progression. You're not breaking the color progression, and you're not getting some weird line on the edge. If you have just a little partial pickup with one color. So that is how I do it. Hopefully that makes sense of when exactly I use which end of the yarn. And that is how, especially with Mustache, since she's got a lot of times, you know, if there's 12 colors in a sequence, you really don't want to break the sequence. If you've got something like with Courtly Love, which is a 2 stripe, yeah, it breaks the stripe sequence, but because it's just 2 colors, you do get back to the other color pretty quickly, and it's not quite, I think, breaking it up quite as badly. But with something like this, I think this was an 8 color sequence. I really didn't want to mess that up. So that is what I do. Hopefully that makes sense and answers your question. So thank you for asking that. Then Leslie, who is Miss Porter, says, Karen, I am about to start knitting a shawl for a friend out of your beautiful Avalon yarn in colorway Donita. Thanks so much. The recipient asks that I somehow reinforce the neck edge because she tends to put a lot of stress on her shawls and wraps in that area. The pattern begins with the garter tab cast on and garter stitch body and eventually blooms into lace. I'm thinking the best way to accomplish the reinforcement would be to carry the yarn held double for the garter tab cast on and first couple of rows in the body, then drop down to 1 strand of yarn. Can you think of a better way to make the neck edge stronger? Thanks in advance for your help. So I was actually emailing Leslie for another reason, so I mentioned a little bit about this in the email, and I got a bit more confirmation from her, because basically exactly where the reinforcement needs to happen kind of determines the answer for this question. So I should have grabbed a shawl. So basically when you have a shawl with a garter tab cast on, usually what you're doing is starting at that center point of the neck. So it'll be the part that if you're wearing it, you know, putting it on the back, that is going to be right here at your neck. So I wanted to know, basically, is the reinforcement just needing to happen at that neck spot, or does it need to happen all along the edge? Because that would be a very different answer. Because if it's just at the neck spot, then, you know, putting some type of reinforcement at the beginning of the shawl, so holding the yarn double or something, or having some type of other yarn that you hold with it that's a little bit stronger. Like a lot of times when people do socks, they'll use a reinforcement thread for the heel and toe section. So just in those sections, they'll hold that reinforcement thread there. So something like that would be possible. Because you're using Avalon, which is a yarn that has silk in it and a pretty high silk content. It's half silk. Silk is a fiber that is a really strong fiber. So silk by itself, you know, you don't have to worry quite as much about wear because the silk itself is strong. But the other half of that yarn is merino, so merino's not the strongest. But the yarn itself probably will help. So in this particular case, holding the yarn double would probably give that just a little extra, I guess, toughness, bulk, just wiggle room in case, you know, parts of it get worn. But this is a yarn that is going to get a little bit fuzzy, so it might be okay as far as the integrity of the shawl, but you're probably not going to get away from getting a little bit of fuzziness right there if it gets rubbed quite a bit. Anyway, I think I kind of jumped around a bit in there. So the idea is that you could hold another yarn for a little bit to reinforce it as well. But since this yarn already has silk in it, probably holding itself doubled would be fine. But you could run in like a 100% silk lace weight or something like that to also kind of add a little bit of strength there. So that's, but you could only do that if you're going to be reinforcing just that part that's going to be right at the back of the neck. Because the way those shawls work is you gradually work out, and the beginning and end of each row is going to be your edge that's along here. So if you wanted to reinforce the entire edge of the shawl, then you wouldn't really be able to do that unless you did some weird type of intarsia thing where you've got the yarn held double at the, the final 2 or 3 stitches, however much make up the edging, which I don't even want to think about how just not unfun that would be. So in the further clarification with Leslie, it is just that back of the neck section that she says she wants to reinforce. So yes, I think your plan probably would work. But like I said, the yarn itself, once it gets worn, like if it's rubbed, then it is going to fuzz up a little bit. And there's not much, because that's the nature of that yarn, not much you can do necessarily about that. But if you're worried about it wearing so much that it might wear through, then holding the yarn double will help reinforce that. Okay, so if the question were to reinforce the entire edge of the shawl, then my answer would be completely different, and that would be, instead of holding yarn doubled, to do some type of stronger edging on the shawl. So crochet an edging, or to do an I-cord edging. And I did think of those ideas, and then when I was looking in the thread, you guys are on top of these things. You know what to do. Those suggestions exactly came in the thread. So Craft Mouse basically suggested the crochet edging, and AC Sparky 89 mentioned the I-cord edging. So you guys are on top of things. Thanks so much. Like that's one reason I love you guys. You are helping each other out. You don't have to wait for me. But that would be my suggestion for sure. If you needed the entire line of the edging to be reinforced, to go back after the shawl is done and to do some type of edging, crochet or I-cord, just to really give that edging a little more strength. So hopefully that answers your question. I can't wait to see how your shawl turns out. You're really great about sending pictures to me in an email, but now that I'm talking here to Leslie, now that you're a member of the podcast group, I hope you'll post in the podcast group on Ravelry, so that way everyone can see your gorgeous shawls, because they are gorgeous. You guys, Leslie does amazing work with shawls, so you definitely should see what she's done. And that's what is in Questions for Karen. If you have a question you'd like me to answer on a future episode, please go over to the Ravelry group and post your question in the thread called Questions for Karen. So quick reminder about the quarterly knit along / crochet along. This topic is pretty wide open. It's not just shawls, it is any project that is hanging over your head. So finishing any project hanging over your head. And however you determine what hanging over your head means, whether that be a project that has been on the needles for ages, a gift that you've promised someone, a project that you've had the yarn and the pattern sitting around waiting for you to cast on for years, finally casting that on, that is a project hanging over your head. So any of those types of things. Frogging a project that you realize has just not been working, that is finishing a project hanging over your head. So we've had some really great projects that have been posted in the Ravelry group. I just went to my iPad to look those up, and my internet connection decided to drop. I've been having problems at home with our internet connection, so right now apparently I can't look at that. Good thing I was able to get those questions in the questions thread. So go over to the Ravelry group, look in the FO and the chat, and see what you guys have been finishing. There have been some really, really great things that you've gotten off your plate. And I don't have them physically yet, but I do have prizes picked out for giveaways for basically a random number generator in the FO thread. In the past, I've done a lot of yarn as prizes, or I've done other like project bags or other types of thing. This time I'm doing something a little bit different. It's not yarn, it's not a project bag, it's not a pattern. I'm not going to tell you what it is yet. They are small items, and I ordered 5 different ones. And I think instead of giving one person all 5, I'm going to give 5 people one. Or 5 posts. I mean, if you have multiple posts, if you've finished multiple projects, it's possible for you to win more than once. And since each item is different, it would be fine if you win more than one. So as soon as those arrive, they are in the mail on their way to me. When they arrive, I will take pictures and post in the chat thread for the quarterly knit along, crochet along, so that way you guys can see what the prices are and I won't make you wait too long to see what they are. And I hope you're excited about them and excited about finishing those projects. So go over to the chat thread, let us know what you're working on. You have until the end of March. That's the end of the quarter, so we're only halfway through the quarter. You've still got plenty of time to finish any of those projects that have been hanging over your head. So that is it for this episode of the podcast. Thank you so very much for watching. I hope that you will come over to Ravelry. There is a chat thread for each podcast episode. So go find the one for episode 70, post any of your thoughts or comments. I'd love to hear from you guys. I love you guys talking to each other. Come over and participate in the quarterly knit along, crochet along, or you can also post right here on YouTube, post a comment. I enjoy reading those. If you would like to hit the thumbs up button under the video, just say that you like this. That just really helps other people find the podcast. And although I am more, especially these days after the realizations I've had, which I've talked about, I'm more interested in just giving you guys that are already watching, just really focusing on you guys, but it is nice to have new people find the podcast as well. So when you hit like and when you make comments, that does help kind of in the algorithm, help my videos kind of pop up as suggestions for people. So I appreciate all of you guys, whether you've been watching from the beginning, whether you just started watching recently, whether this is your first episode. I hope you'll come back. And hopefully in 2 weeks I will be back, barring any illness or anything else. And until next time, happy knitting!